A Georgia cold case from 2001 was finally solved, and the arrest shocked an entire community. On January 19, 2001, Tara Louise Baker sat in her Athens apartment, law books spread across her desk, dreams of becoming a lawyer filling her mind. By morning, she was dead, beaten, sexually assaulted, and murdered in her own home. Then her apartment was deliberately set on fire to destroy the evidence. For 23 years, her killer walked free while Tara's family refused to give up hope for justice. Then in 2024, investigative genetic genealogy spoke where decades of silence had failed them. The DNA match was undeniable. Edric Lamont Faust, a man who had lived quietly in Athens for over 2 decades, hiding in plain sight. Now he faces charges of murder, arson, aggravated assault, and sexual assault. But how did someone evade justice for so long in this small community? And what finally brought the truth to light? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The morning of January 19, 2001, started like any other for Tara Louise Baker. At 23, she was everything Athens, Georgia, had taught her to be determined, kind, and ready to change the world. Her small apartment near the University of Georgia campus was cluttered with the tools of her ambition. Legal textbooks stacked on every surface, highlighters scattered across her desk, and yellow sticky notes marking important cases she'd studied late into the night. Tara had always been the type to rise early. While her classmates slept off late-night study sessions, she was already dressed and reviewing her notes for the day ahead. Her criminal law textbook lay open to a chapter about justice delayed but not denied. She had underlined a quote about truth emerging even after years of darkness. The irony would haunt everyone who knew her. Her coffee was still warm when she checked her reflection one last time in the mirror. Dark hair pulled back, eyes bright with the kind of hope that comes from darkla, believing the future holds endless possibilities. She was a first-year law student, but already professors noticed her sharp questions and her genuine desire to help people who had been forgotten by the system. Tara grabbed her backpack and keys, ready to face another day of classes, study groups, and dreams of becoming the kind of lawyer who fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She had no way of knowing that within hours, her own case would become the kind that haunts investigators for decades, that her own family would join the ranks of those forgotten by a system she'd wanted to serve. The apartment door closed behind her with a soft click. By evening, that same door would be surrounded by fire trucks, police cars, and the kind of chaos that changes a community forever. The call came in at 8:47 a.m. Apartment fire on Baxter Street, possible person trapped inside. Captain Mike Rodriguez had been fighting fires in Athens for 12 years, but something about the thick black smoke billowing from the second-floor apartment made his stomach clench. This wasn't the clean burn of an accidental kitchen fire or faulty wiring. This was different. "Grab the axes," he shouted to his crew as they pulled up to the complex. Students and neighbors were already gathered outside, some still in pajamas, pointing up at the smoke. A few were crying. Others held phones to their ears, calling friends to make sure they were safe. Rodriguez's team moved fast. The smoke was too thick, too dark. Someone was definitely inside. They could hear something burning that shouldn't be burning: furniture, maybe fabric. The smell was wrong too. Sweet and acrid at the same time, like burning plastic mixed with something else he couldn't identify. "Tara!" a neighbor was screaming from below. "Her name is Tara Baker. She's a law student." The firefighters broke through the front door with a crash. The heat hit them like a wall, but they pushed forward anyway. Rodriguez had pulled dozens of people from fires over the years. College kids who fell asleep with candles burning. Elderly folks whose space heaters overheated. Most of the time, if you got there fast enough, you could save them. But when they found Tara's body in the bedroom, Rodriguez knew immediately this wasn't about saving anyone. This was about something much darker. The positioning was wrong. The burns were wrong. Everything about the scene screamed that someone had set this fire on purpose, and that someone had wanted to hide something terrible. The axe in his hand suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at the apartment complex 20 minutes after the fire department. She was still new to the Athens Clark County Police Department, having transferred from Atlanta just 6 months earlier. She'd moved here because she wanted to get away from the big city crime, the endless cycle of violence that had worn her down. Athens was supposed to be different college kids, small-town problems, manageable cases. The yellow crime scene tape went up fast, creating a barrier between the smoking apartment building and the growing crowd of onlookers. Martinez ducked under the tape and immediately knew her peaceful small-town days were over. "What do we have?" she asked Captain Rodriguez, who was standing outside the apartment door, his face grim. 23-year-old female, University of Georgia law student named Tara Louise Baker, he replied, pulling off his helmet. "This wasn't an accident, detective. Someone did this to her, then tried to burn the evidence." Martinez felt her chest tighten. She'd worked homicides in Atlanta, but something about this felt different. Maybe it was the setting, this quiet college town where parents sent their kids believing they'd be safe. Maybe it was Tara's age, so close to her own daughters. Maybe it was just the realization that evil doesn't respect small-town boundaries. The crime scene tape fluttered in the January wind as more police cars arrived. News vans wouldn't be far behind. By tomorrow, this yellow tape would be the most photographed thing in Athens. It would appear on morning news broadcasts, in newspaper photos, and eventually in cold case documentaries. But right now, it was just a thin plastic barrier trying to hold back the chaos that was about to descend on this community. Martinez stepped under the tape and into Tara's apartment, knowing that her job was no longer about keeping the peace, it was about finding a killer. The University of Georgia campus had seen its share of tragedies over the years, but nothing like this. By evening, word had spread through the dormitories, Greek houses, and apartment complexes like wildfire. Tara Baker, the quiet, serious law student who tutored underclassmen and volunteered at the legal aid clinic, was dead, murdered in her own home. Professor Janet Williams, who taught Tara's criminal law class, was the one who organized the vigil. She'd known Tara for only a few months, but the young woman had impressed her with thoughtful questions about justice and civil rights. Tara wasn't the loudest student in class, but when she spoke, everyone listened. By sunset, hundreds of students gathered on the campus quad, each holding a white candle. The flames flickered in the January air, creating pools of light in the darkness. Some students had known Tara personally, classmates from study groups, friends from the library, dorm mates who'd shared late-night conversations about their dreams for the future. Others had never met her but came anyway, understanding that what happened to Tara could have happened to any of them. She wanted to be a public defender, said Rebecca Chen, Tara's study partner, her voice breaking as she spoke into the microphone. She said, "Too many people fall through the cracks in the system." She wanted to catch them before they fell. The candles burned steadily as speaker after speaker shared memories of Tara's kindness, her determination, her quiet strength. Parents called their own college-age children that night, voices trembling as they asked them to be careful, to stay safe, to remember that the world could be dangerous, even in places that felt secure. The vigil candles would burn for hours, but the fear they represented would linger much longer. Detective Martinez worked through the night, photographing every inch of Tara's apartment. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation had sent their best crime scene technicians, and they moved through the burned rooms like surgeons, collecting evidence that might someday point to a killer. The apartment told a story, but not the whole story. The fire had been set deliberately, probably using an accelerant. It had burned hottest in the bedroom, where Tara's body was found. But the killer had made mistakes. Fire doesn't always destroy everything, and sometimes it preserves things you wouldn't expect. "Got something here," called GBI technician David Park, carefully bagging a piece of fabric that had somehow survived the flames. "Looks like it might have DNA on it." They collected everything they could find: clothing fragments, carpet fibers, pieces of furniture that hadn't completely burned. Most importantly, they found biological evidence, traces of DNA that didn't belong to Tara. It wasn't much, but it was something. In 2001, DNA technology was still evolving, but it was their best hope of identifying her killer. Martinez watched the technicians work, each piece of evidence carefully labeled and sealed. Some of these bags would sit in a laboratory freezer for months while technicians tried to extract usable genetic material. Others would be tested immediately, run through the FBI's CODIS database to see if they matched any known criminals. "This is our best shot," Park told her as they finished up just before dawn. "If her killer is in the system, we'll find him. If not." He didn't finish the sentence, but Martinez knew what he meant. If Tara's killer had never been arrested before, if he wasn't in any database, then these carefully preserved pieces of evidence might sit on a shelf for years, waiting for science to catch up with justice. James and Patricia Baker drove through the night from their home in Macon, Georgia, after getting the call no parent ever wants to receive. Their only daughter was dead, murdered in her apartment while pursuing her dream of becoming a lawyer. By the time they reached Athens, the sun was rising on their new reality. A world without Tara's laughter, her Sunday phone calls, her excited updates about law school. The photo Detective Martinez showed them was from Tara's high school graduation just 5 years earlier. In it, she's wearing her cap and gown, holding her diploma, smiling, the kind of smile that suggests the whole world is full of possibilities. Her parents had taken that photo in their backyard, proud beyond words that their daughter was heading to the University of Georgia on an academic scholarship. She was going to change things, Patricia whispered, clutching the photo. She always said the system wasn't fair to poor people, and she was going to fix it. James Baker was a mechanic, a quiet man who'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for Tara's education. Patricia was a nurse who'd pulled double shifts so their daughter could focus on her studies instead of worrying about money. They'd sacrificed everything to give Tara opportunities they'd never had. "We need to know who did this," James said to Detective Martinez, his voice steady despite his tears. Tara fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Now, someone needs to fight for her. The high school photo would become the image the family shared with reporters, the one that appeared on missing person flyers in the early days when they still held hope, and later on memorial cards at her funeral. It was Tara, as her parents wanted to remember her young, hopeful, ready, and to take on the world. It was also the image that would haunt their fight for justice for the next 23 years. 6 months after Tara's murder, Detective Martinez's desk was covered with manila folders, each one representing a different theory about who might have killed her. The case file had grown thick with interviews, forensic reports, and dead-end leads that had consumed hundreds of hours of investigation. They'd interviewed everyone who knew Tara, classmates, professors, neighbors, even people who'd simply lived in the same apartment complex. Her ex-boyfriend from high school had an airtight alibi. The maintenance worker who'd been in her building the week before passed a polygraph test. A suspicious man seen lurking around the complex turned out to be someone's uncle visiting from out of town. The DNA evidence was their strongest lead, but it hadn't matched anyone in the CODIS database. Whoever killed Tara had never been arrested for a crime serious enough to require DNA collection. That meant he could be anyone, a random stranger, someone from the community, someone living a completely normal life while carrying the secret of what he'd done. We've talked to over 200 people, Martinez told her captain during one of their weekly case reviews. We've followed up on dozens of tips from the public. We've looked at every registered sex offender in a 50-mile radius. Nothing. The forensic evidence was clear. Tara had been sexually assaulted and beaten before the fire was set. The killer had used something to accelerate the flames, probably gasoline or another common accelerant. But knowing how the crime happened wasn't the same as knowing who committed it. The case file folder kept growing, but the answers remained elusive. Each new lead seemed promising at first, then collapsed under scrutiny. Each witness interview added more questions than answers. Somewhere in that thick folder was probably a clue that would eventually solve the case. But in 2001, they didn't have the tools to find it. May 2004, 3 years after Tara's murder, her law school classmates walked across the stage to receive their diplomas. The ceremony was held in the University of Georgia's Stegeman Coliseum, the same building where Tara had attended basketball games and student events during her short time as a law student. Rebecca Chen, Tara's former study partner, was among the graduates. She'd struggled through the remaining 2.5 years of law school, often thinking about how Tara should have been sitting beside her in class, asking thoughtful questions and pushing everyone to think deeper about justice and fairness. "I keep thinking she should be here," Rebecca told her parents after the ceremony. "She was smarter than most of us. She would have graduated at the top of the class." The graduation program listed all 247 students in the class of 2004. Tara's name wasn't there, of course, but her absence felt like a presence anyway. Several students had quietly dedicated their law degrees to her memory. Professor Williams had mentioned her in the faculty address, talking about students who reminded everyone why the law mattered. James and Patricia Baker watched the ceremony from the audience, invited by Professor Williams, who thought it might bring them some comfort to see Tara's classmates achieve the dream their daughter never could. Instead, it was heartbreaking. Every young woman walking across that stage could have been Tara. Every proud parent in the audience reminded them of the celebration they'd never have. "She should be starting her career right now," Patricia whispered to her husband. "She should be calling us every week to tell us about her cases, about the people she's helping." The graduation programs from 2004, 2005, 2006, and beyond would pile up over the years, each one representing a milestone Tara would never reach, a future that had been stolen from her and from everyone who loved her. By 2020, Detective Sarah Martinez had been promoted to lieutenant and had moved on to other cases. Tara Baker's murder remained unsolved. The case file relegated to a storage room filled with other cold cases that had frustrated investigators for years. But the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit never forgot about Tara. Agent Michael Thompson had been with the Cold Case Unit for 5 years when he first pulled Tara's file. He was drawn to cases like hers, young victims with their whole lives ahead of them, families who'd never given up hope, evidence that might finally yield answers with modern technology. The DNA evidence from 2001 was good quality, Thompson told his supervisor during a case review meeting, but we didn't have the technology then that we have now. With investigative genetic genealogy, we might be able to identify this guy even if he's not in CODIS. The Cold Case Unit badge on Thompson's desk had become a symbol of hope for families like the Bakers. While local police departments often had to focus on new crimes, the Cold Case Unit had the time and resources to revisit old evidence with fresh eyes and cutting-edge science. Thompson had worked dozens of cold cases, but something about Tara's story resonated with him. Maybe it was the fact that she'd wanted to be a lawyer, to help people who couldn't help themselves. Maybe it was the way her parents had never stopped calling, never stopped asking if there were any new developments. Maybe it was just the recognition that someone who'd killed once might have killed again, and stopping them even decades later could prevent future victims. Let's run this DNA through the genealogy databases, Thompson decided. It's time to give this family some answers. Patricia Baker had kept every photo album exactly the way it was the day Tara died. The living room of the family's modest home in Macon was filled with memories, school pictures from kindergarten through college, family vacations to Myrtle Beach, Christmas mornings with Tara still in her pajamas, excited about presents under the tree. When Agent Thompson visited to discuss reopening the case, Patricia pulled out the photo albums without being asked. She'd done this hundreds of times over the years, with detectives, with reporters, with friends who wanted to help keep Tara's memory alive. This is her first day of high school, Patricia said, pointing to a photo of a gangly 15-year-old with braces and determined eyes. She was already talking about becoming a lawyer. She'd seen some movie about civil rights attorneys, and she decided that was what she wanted to do with her life. The photos told the story of an ordinary family that had raised an extraordinary daughter, James teaching Tara to change a tire in the driveway, Patricia and Tara baking cookies for a church fundraiser, Tara at her high school graduation, looking impossibly young and hopeful. She called us every Sunday, James added quietly, every single Sunday for 6 months after she started law school. We talked for an hour about her classes, her friends, her plans. She was so excited about everything. Agent Thompson studied each photo carefully. These weren't just pictures of a victim. They were glimpses into a life that had been full of promise, full of love, full of dreams that would never be realized. Somewhere out there, Tara's killer was probably living his own life, maybe looking at his own family photos, maybe pretending that January 19, 2001 had never happened. But the Baker family couldn't pretend. For them, time had stopped that day. The DNA sample that had sat in a Georgia Bureau of Investigation freezer for 23 years was smaller than a grain of rice, but it contained the genetic blueprint of Tara Baker's killer. In 2001, that sample could tell investigators that the perpetrator was male, probably Caucasian, but nothing more specific. In 2024, that same sample could potentially identify him by name. Dr. Lisa Chen, no relation to Tara's classmate Rebecca, was the lab director who oversaw the new analysis. She'd spent 15 years working in forensic genetics, watching the technology evolve from basic DNA fingerprinting to the sophisticated genealogical analysis that was now solving cold cases across the country. The sample quality is actually quite good, Doctor, Chen told Agent Thompson during a video call. Whoever this person is, we should be able to get a full genetic profile that we can use for genealogical analysis. The process was painstakingly slow. First, the DNA had to be extracted and amplified. Then it was analyzed to create a genetic profile that could be compared to public genealogy databases. Unlike the FBI's CODIS database, which only contained profiles of convicted criminals, the genealogy databases were filled with ordinary people who'd submitted their DNA to learn about their ancestry. We're not looking for an exact match, Dr. Chen explained. We're looking for relatives, cousins, great-aunts, anyone whose DNA shows they're related to our perpetrator. Then we build family trees backward to identify possible suspects. The technology was revolutionary, but it required patience. Each family tree took weeks to construct. Each potential suspect had to be carefully vetted. But when it worked, when the science led investigators to the right person, it was like magic. Cold cases that had been unsolved for decades suddenly had names attached to them. For the first time in 23 years, Tara Baker's case had a real chance of being solved. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2024. Agent Thompson was at his desk, working on another case, when his phone rang. Doctor, Chen's voice was calm but excited, the tone of a scientist who'd just made a significant discovery. We've got something on the Baker case, she said. The genealogy analysis worked. We've identified several potential suspects, but one stands out. A man named Edric Lamont Faust. Thompson felt his pulse quicken. After more than 2 decades, they might finally have a name to go with the DNA evidence. Tell me about him. He's 56 years old, lives in Athens, no criminal record, which explains why he wasn't in CODIS. The genealogical analysis shows he's almost certainly our perpetrator. The family tree connections are too strong to be coincidental. The laboratory report was 8 pages long, filled with charts and genetic markers that Thompson didn't fully understand. But he understood the conclusion. There was a 99.7% probability that Edric Lamont Faust was the source of the DNA found at Tara Baker's crime scene. Faust's name meant nothing to Thompson or to any of the other investigators who'd worked on Tara's case over the years. He'd never been interviewed, never been considered a suspect, never appeared in any of the reports that filled the thick case file. He was exactly what investigators had feared, a killer who'd hidden in plain sight, living a normal life while carrying an unspeakable secret. "How long do you need to confirm this?" Thompson asked. "We'll need a direct DNA sample from Faust for absolute confirmation," Dr. Chen replied. "But the genealogical evidence is solid. This is your guy." Thompson stared at the laboratory report for a long moment. 23 years of investigation, thousands of hours of police work, and the answer had been sitting in a freezer the whole time, waiting for science to catch up with justice. Edric Lamont Faust had lived in Athens for 34 years, working various jobs and keeping a low profile. To his neighbors, he was quiet but polite. To his co-workers, he was reliable but unremarkable. To the Athens Clark County Police Department, he was invisible. No arrests, no complaints, no reason for law enforcement to know his name. Agent Thompson spent a week building a comprehensive background file on Faust. Born in 1968 in rural Georgia, he'd moved to Athens as a young man in the early 1990s. He'd worked in construction, landscaping, and retail over the years. Never married, no children, few close relationships. He rented a small house on the outskirts of town and lived alone. "On paper, he looks like a ghost," Thompson told his supervisor. "The kind of guy who goes to work, pays his bills, and doesn't cause trouble. Perfect cover for someone carrying a secret like this." The most disturbing discovery was how close Faust had lived to Tara's apartment complex in 2001. His address at the time was less than 2 miles away, close enough that he could have walked there, close enough that he might have seen her around town or on campus before deciding to target her. Thompson studied photos of Faust from his driver's license renewals over the years. In 2001, he would have been 33 years old, strong enough to overpower a young woman, smart enough to try to destroy evidence with fire. By 2024, he was graying and ordinary looking, the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. The scary thing is, he's been living here the whole time, Thompson told Detective Martinez during a phone call. All these years, while Tara's family was wondering who killed their daughter, he was probably shopping at the same grocery stores, eating at the same restaurants, maybe even walking past memorials to Tara without anyone knowing. The breakthrough meeting took place in a small conference room at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation headquarters on April 10, 2024. Agent Thompson had called together everyone involved in the renewed investigation. Dr. Chen joining by video from the lab, Detective Martinez, now retired but still invested in the case, and GBI supervisors who would decide whether they had enough evidence to make an arrest. Thompson stood in front of a whiteboard covered with photos, timeline charts, and evidence summaries. At the center was a driver's license photo of Edric Lamont Faust, surrounded by 23 years of investigation materials that had never before pointed to a single suspect. "Here's what we know," Thompson began. "DNA evidence collected in 2001 is a 99.7% match to Edric Lamont Faust through investigative genetic genealogy. He lived less than 2 miles from the victim's apartment at the time of the murder. He has no alibi for January 19, 2001. He was between jobs and living alone." "Doctor," Chen's voice crackled through the video conference speaker, "the genetic evidence is as solid as it gets, without a direct sample. But once we arrest him, we can confirm it with a cheek swab." Detective Martinez studied the whiteboard from her seat at the conference table. "It's him," she said quietly. "After all these years of wondering, it's finally him." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed what they were seeing. For more than 2 decades, investigators had searched for Tara Baker's killer among registered sex offenders, violent criminals, and obvious suspects. They'd never imagined that the answer would be found in the DNA of a quiet, unremarkable man who'd managed to blend into the community without drawing any attention. "We have enough for an arrest warrant," the GBI supervisor decided. "Let's bring him in. Arrest made in 2001 UGA student murder." Read the headline in the Athens Banner-Herald on April 15, 2024. The story, written by crime reporter Jennifer Walsh, began with a sentence that many readers would have to read twice to believe. A 56-year-old Athens man has been arrested in connection with the murder of University of Georgia law student Tara Louise Baker, whose death in 2001 shocked the community and remained unsolved for more than 2 decades. The newspaper's phones rang constantly that morning. Readers called to confirm they'd read the headline correctly. Tara's former classmates, now lawyers and professionals in their 40s, called to express their relief and their sorrow. Neighbors of Edric Lamont Faust called to say they couldn't believe the quiet man they'd known for years could be capable of such violence. "I saw him at the grocery store just last week," one neighbor told Walsh during a follow-up interview. "He seemed so normal. He helped me carry my bags to my car." How do you live next to someone for 20 years and never know they're a killer? The newspaper's online version of the story was shared thousands of times on social media, reaching Tara's former classmates and professors who'd scattered across the country in the years since her death. Many commented with their memories of Tara, their shock at the arrest, and their gratitude that her family might finally have answers. Professor Janet Williams, now retired, read the headline at her kitchen table and cried for the first time in years. She'd thought of Tara often over the decades, wondering if her killer would ever be found. The news brought relief, but also a fresh wave of grief for all the lives Tara might have touched, all the good she might have done if she'd lived to become the lawyer she'd dreamed of being. The arrest warrant for Edric Lamont Faust was signed by Superior Court Judge Rebecca Morrison on April 14, 2024. The document was just 2 pages long, but it represented the culmination of 23 years of investigation, advances in forensic science, and a family's unwavering determination to find justice for their daughter. The state of Georgia versus Edric Lamont Faust. The warrant began, followed by charges that painted a horrific picture: malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, rape, aggravated sodomy, and first-degree arson. Each charge carried the potential for life in prison. Together, they told the story of a violent crime that had traumatized a community and destroyed a family's future. Agent Thompson carried the warrant himself when the arrest team went to Faust's house at dawn on April 15. They'd planned the arrest carefully, knowing that a man who'd evaded capture for over 2 decades might try to run if he knew they were coming. But when they knocked on his door, Faust answered calmly, almost as if he'd been expecting them. "Edric Lamont Faust, you're under arrest for the murder of Tara Louise Baker," Thompson said, reading from the warrant. As other agents handcuffed the suspect, Faust said nothing, but Thompson later described his expression as resigned rather than surprised. The arrest warrant would become a key piece of evidence in the trial to come, but for Thompson, it represented something more personal. He'd worked dozens of cold cases over the years, and many families never got the closure that the Bakers were about to receive. The warrant was proof that persistence pays off, that justice delayed doesn't always mean justice denied. As they drove Faust to the Clark County Jail, Thompson thought about Tara Baker and the dreams that had died with her 23 years earlier. The press conference was held at the Athens Clark County Police Department on April 16, 2024, 1 day after Faust's arrest. James and Patricia Baker had driven up from Macon, still struggling to process that their daughter's killer had finally been caught. They sat at a table facing a room full of reporters, cameras, and bright lights, holding hands and trying to find words for emotions they'd carried for more than half their lives. "For 23 years, we've wondered who took our daughter from us," Patricia said into the microphone, her voice steady despite her tears. "We've wondered if we'd ever get justice for Tara, if her killer was still out there, if he'd hurt other families the way he hurt ours." James Baker was a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone in the room listened. Tara wanted to be a lawyer because she believed in justice. She believed that the truth would always come out, even when it takes a long time. She was right. Behind them, a large photo of Tara showed her at her college graduation, young, hopeful, ready to change the world. Agent Thompson stood nearby, along with other investigators who'd worked on the case over the years. Detective Martinez, now retired, had driven up from Atlanta to be there for the moment she'd waited for since 2001. "We want to thank everyone who never gave up on Tara's case," Patricia continued. "The police officers, the GBI agents, the scientists who developed the technology that finally gave us answers. And we want people to know that Tara wasn't just a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a future lawyer who wanted to help people. She deserved better than what happened to her, and she deserved justice." The microphone carried their words to news stations across Georgia and beyond, finally giving voice to grief that had been silent for too long. 3 months after Faust's arrest, the University of Georgia Law School unveiled a memorial plaque honoring Tara Louise Baker. The bronze plaque was installed in the courtyard outside the law library, where Tara had spent countless hours studying during her brief time as a student. "In memory of Tara Louise Baker, 1977 to 2001, the plaque read, "First-year law student, advocate for justice, taken too soon, but never forgotten." The dedication ceremony was small and tasteful, attended by Tara's family, her former professors, and classmates who'd kept her memory alive for more than 2 decades. Dean Robert Wilson spoke about students who inspire others through their dedication to justice and fairness. "Tara represented the best of what we hope to cultivate in our students," Dean Wilson said. "She understood that the law isn't just about rules and procedures. It's about helping people, especially those who can't help themselves." Rebecca Chen, now a successful civil rights attorney in Atlanta, spoke about her former study partner. "Tara would have been an incredible lawyer," she said. "She had this way of seeing past the legal technicalities to the human stories underneath. She cared about people who were forgotten or ignored by the system." The plaque would become a quiet place of reflection for future law students, many of whom would learn Tara's story and be inspired by her dedication to justice. But for her parents, it represented something more profound: proof that their daughter's life had meaning beyond the terrible way it ended. She wanted to make a difference, Patricia Baker said after the ceremony. Maybe she still can, through the students who see this plaque and remember why they wanted to study law in the first place. The memorial was healing for a community that had carried the weight of an unsolved murder for too long. District Attorney John Patterson had prosecuted hundreds of cases during his 15-year career, but the case against Edric Lamont Faust presented unique challenges. The evidence was strong. DNA doesn't lie, but the passage of time had complicated everything. Witnesses had died or moved away. Physical evidence had degraded. The crime scene had been cleaned and repaired years earlier. This case is going to come down to the science, Patterson told his team of prosecutors during their first strategy meeting. We have DNA evidence that proves Faust was at the scene, but we need to build a narrative that helps the jury understand what happened that night. The legal brief Patterson's team prepared was 47 pages long, outlining their theory of the case and the evidence they planned to present. The DNA evidence was overwhelming. Multiple samples collected from different locations in Tara's apartment all pointed to the same perpetrator. The fire evidence showed clear signs of arson. The medical examiner's report from 2001 detailed the brutal nature of the assault, but proving that Faust committed the crime was only part of the challenge. The defense would argue that 23 years was too long to wait, that memories had faded and evidence had been compromised. They'd question whether a fair trial was still possible after so much time had passed. The victim's family deserves justice, Patterson wrote in his brief. The passage of time doesn't diminish the heinous nature of this crime or the defendant's responsibility for his action. Modern science has finally given us the tools to identify him, and the criminal justice system must respond accordingly. The brief would serve as the prosecution's roadmap for the trial, but Patterson knew that no legal document could capture the full impact of Tara's death on her family and community. As Faust's trial approached, friends and classmates began sharing photos and memories that painted a picture of who Tara Baker really was. The Athens Banner-Herald ran a series called Remembering Tara, featuring yearbook photos, candid snapshots, and stories from people who'd known her before she became a victim. The photos showed a young woman who'd been actively involved in her community. Tara, volunteering at a homeless shelter during high school. Tara, participating in mock trial competitions. Tara, at her college graduation, arm in arm with friends who'd supported her through 4 years of undergraduate study. She wasn't just smart, said her high school friend Maria Santos. She was kind. She was the person you called when you needed help with homework or when you were having problems at home. She listened to people, really listened. The yearbook photos from the University of Georgia showed Tara during her undergraduate years participating in pre-law society, volunteering for political campaigns, tutoring students who were struggling with their studies. Even then, she'd been focused on her goal of becoming a lawyer, but she'd never been too busy to help others. I remember her saying that too many people fall through the cracks in the legal system, said Professor Williams. She wanted to be the kind of lawyer who caught people before they fell, who gave them a voice when nobody else would listen. The photos and memories helped the community remember that Tara's life had been about more than the terrible way it ended. She'd been a daughter, a friend, a student with big dreams and the determination to achieve them. She'd been someone who'd wanted to make the world a better place, one case at a time. The trial of Edric Lamont Faust began on October 14, 2024, in the Superior Court of Clark County. Judge Rebecca Morrison presided over a packed courtroom filled with reporters, Tara's family and friends, and community members who'd waited more than 2 decades for this moment. Faust sat at the defense table in an orange jail jumpsuit, flanked by 2 public defenders who'd been assigned to his case. He'd maintained his innocence since his arrest, claiming that he'd never heard of Tara Baker before his arrest and had no idea how his DNA could have ended up at her apartment. The courtroom gavel, a symbol of justice and the rule of law, would be used dozens of times over the course of the 2-week trial as Judge Morrison maintained order and guided the proceedings through complex scientific evidence and emotional testimony. District Attorney Patterson opened with a powerful statement about justice delayed but not denied. 23 years ago, Tara Baker was brutally murdered in her own home by this defendant, he told the jury. For more than 2 decades, he's lived free while she lay in the ground. But science doesn't lie, and DNA doesn't forget. The evidence will show that Edric Lamont Faust is responsible for one of the most heinous crimes ever committed in this county. The defense attorney, Sarah Reynolds, urged the jury to consider the passage of time and the limits of memory. 23 years is a long time, she said. Evidence degrades, witnesses forget, and mistakes can be made. My client maintains his innocence, and it's the state's burden to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As opening statements concluded, the gavel echoed through the courtroom one more time, calling everyone to the serious business of seeking justice for Tara Louise Baker. The witness stand in Judge Morrison's courtroom became the focal point where 23 years of investigation finally met 23 years of denial. One by one, witnesses took the stand to tell Tara's story and explain how science had finally identified her killer. Dr. Lisa Chen was the prosecution's key witness, spending an entire day explaining investigative genetic genealogy to the jury. Using charts and diagrams, she showed how DNA from the crime scene had been matched to Faust's family tree through multiple genetic databases. The probability that this DNA came from someone other than Mr. Faust is less than 1 in 500 billion, Dr. Chen testified. In the entire history of human civilization, there have never been 500 billion people. This DNA belongs to the defendant. Detective Martinez, now retired, took the stand to describe the original crime scene investigation. She'd kept detailed notes and photos from 2001, and she walked the jury through the evidence that had been collected and preserved for more than 2 decades. We knew we had the killer's DNA, Martinez testified. We just didn't have the technology to identify him yet, but we never stopped believing that someday science would catch up with justice. James and Patricia Baker both testified about their daughter's life and their family's 23-year journey seeking answers. Patricia's voice broke as she described the phone call that changed their lives forever, and the years of wondering whether Tara's killer would ever be found. She wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves, Patricia said from the witness stand. Now I'm asking you to help her get the justice she deserves. Faust declined to testify in his own defense, leaving the witness stand empty of his voice just as he'd left Tara's family without answers for more than 2 decades. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict, guilty on all counts. Edric Lamont Faust was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Tara Louise Baker. As the judge read the sentence, James and Patricia Baker held hands and cried tears of relief, of grief, of something that wasn't quite closure but was close enough. After the trial, the family drove to Macon City Cemetery where Tara had been buried 23 years earlier. Her gravestone was simple granite with her name, dates, and an inscription that read, "Beloved daughter, future lawyer, forever in our hearts." "We can finally tell her that we got him," Patricia whispered, kneeling beside the grave. "It took 23 years, but we never gave up. We never stopped fighting for you." The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of wind through the pine trees. Other families had come and gone over the years, bringing flowers and memories to their own loved one. But the Bakers' visits had always carried an extra weight, the knowledge that their daughter's killer was still free, still living his life while hers had ended so violently. Now, for the first time since 2001, they could visit Tara's grave without that crushing sense of unfinished business. Justice had been served. The man who'd taken their daughter from them would spend the rest of his life in prison, never again able to hurt another family the way he'd hurt theirs. "She would have been a great lawyer," James said, placing fresh flowers on the grave. "She would have helped so many people, but maybe she still did help people, in her own way. Maybe her case will inspire other families never to give up hope." The gravestone would remain the same, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer just a memorial to a life cut short. It was proof that justice, however delayed, can still find its way home.